everyone. Welcome back to the deep codes behind Britain's rise. This is the podcast where we don't just tell stories, we decode the system behind the story.
We break down the power plays, the institutions, and the often overlooked turning points, the stuff that actually shaped Britain into a global force.
Today's episode, the English Civil War. And here's the real question that's been bugging me, Alex. How did a country that loves its monarchy so much end up literally beheading its king? What happened to the whole peaceful evolution thing?
That's a fantastic question, Barbara, and it really cuts to the heart of what we're exploring. The English Civil War wasn't just a war. It was a political earthquake that rocked England to its core. It wasn't just armies clashing. It was a battle over the very essence of power and governance.
So it wasn't just a big fight. It was more like a giant argument about who's actually in charge. The king, the government, or the idea of royal power itself.
Exactly. At its core, it was a struggle to define the role of the monarchy and ultimately who truly held the reins of England. For centuries, English monarchs had operated under constraints ever since the Magna Carta in 1215. But when Charles I took the throne in 2065, those historical constraints became a massive source of frustration for him.
Ah, Charles I. So he's the one who thinks he's above it all, right? I remember hearing something about divine right.
Exactly. Charles firmly believed in the divine right of kings. His power, he believed, was given to him directly from God, with absolutely no room for interference from Parliament or anyone else. He saw himself as God's direct representative on earth, accountable to no one.
Okay, so he's got this grand idea of himself, this divine power, but then reality hits, right? Because kings, even divinely appointed ones, still need cash.
You're right. And this belief soon collided with a harsh reality. Charles needed money, and he needed a lot of it. His military campaigns, particularly the wars with Scotland, drained the treasury. The issue here was Parliament controlled the money.
Wait, so Parliament controls the money, but Charles thinks he doesn't need their permission? Classic standoff. What did he do? Just try to take it?
Well, he tried. Charles insisted on raising taxes without parliamentary approval, which directly violated long-established traditions. You can imagine how that went down. The relationship between the king and Parliament rapidly deteriorated, with tensions rising much faster than any royal decree could resolve.
Oh man, I can almost hear the shouting matches. So he desperately needs money for these wars, Parliament says no, and he just goes around them?
Exactly. Eventually, Charles had no choice but to call Parliament. In April 1640, desperate for funds, he reluctantly convened the Short Parliament. But, as the name suggests, it was short-lived. This assembly lasted just 3 weeks before it was dismissed in May.
3 weeks? That's barely enough time to settle in. So he tries to get money, fails, dismisses them, and then what? Does he just give up?
No. It got even worse for Charles. Scotland erupted into rebellion, known as the Bishops' Wars. Facing financial disaster and a full-scale rebellion, Charles had no choice but to call Parliament again, this time the Long Parliament, in November 1640.
The Long Parliament. That sounds ominous. What were they demanding?
Oh, they didn't hold back. Parliament wanted to severely limit the king's power over taxes, military control, and even the appointment of ministers. This only deepened the rift between the crown and what was now seen as the legitimate government.
Charles I was a man of culture and refinement, but his belief in the divine right of kings led him to reject any checks on his authority. So he wasn't a mustache-twirling villain, just a guy really, really stubborn about absolute power.
Exactly. Charles sought to establish an absolute monarchy in England, similar to what was happening in France at the time. His unyielding stance drove Parliament and the monarchy into a collision course that would eventually lead to civil war in 1642.
So it's like two trains barreling towards each other on the same track. No way to avoid the crash.
A perfect analogy, Barbara. The English Civil War wasn't just a fight for control, but a battle for England's future. Charles I's attempt to establish unchecked royal power versus Parliament's drive to curb that power and push for constitutional reform. This ideological battle would forever reshape British politics, laying the groundwork for future democratic developments.
So, how did this whole English Civil War actually play out?
Well, at first, things weren't exactly looking sunny for Parliament. Their forces were, to put it mildly, getting their socks knocked off by the king's royalists. It looked like King Charles might just march his way to absolute power.
Ouch. Sounds like Parliament was really getting hammered. So the king had the upper hand then. How did they turn that around? It wasn't just a miracle, was it?
Pretty close to a miracle, actually, because a military superstar entered the scene. Emphasize Oliver Cromwell. Under his leadership, Parliament's army, especially his Ironsides cavalry, turned the tide. By 1649, after a string of bloody battles, they had captured King Charles I, put him on trial, and, almost unthinkably, executed him.
Wait, emphasize what? Executed the king? Seriously? That's one brutal bad day at the office for a guy who believed God gave him the job. And hey, is that why the British Army isn't called the Royal Army? Because they, did that?
That's one of the classic history myths, Barbara. It's often said the army lost its royal title because they killed the king and the monarchy never forgave them. Sounds juicy, but it's mostly bunk.
Aw, man, I was ready to believe it. That sounded so perfectly British. Dark, awkward, and full of historical guilt.
It's got charm, I'll give you that. But in reality, many regiments within the British Army still carry royal titles like the Royal Artillery and Royal Engineers. The reason there's no unified royal army is more about administrative quirks than royal resentment. So yes, we can finally retire that urban legend.
All right, mystery solved. Now, back to the big picture. The king is dead, so did the revolution win?
On the surface, yes. The monarchy was dismantled, the royalists crushed, Parliament had fought and won. But here's the twist. Defeating your enemy doesn't guarantee achieving your goal.
You're building the suspense again. Wasn't the whole point of this war to build a system, a structure that could keep royal power in check? With the king gone, wasn't that mission accomplished?
That was the mission, but what happened instead was revealing. They removed the king and ended up weakening the very institutions that were supposed to limit power.
Wait, emphasize what? That's backwards. You fight a revolution for checks and balances, not against them. What went wrong?
The short answer, Oliver Cromwell. Remember him, the war hero? It turns out he wasn't too fond of limits on his own power either. King Charles, for all his flaws, still had Parliament and centuries of legal tradition holding him in check. Cromwell? Not so much.
So, let me guess. New boss, same thirst for control?
Pretty much. He declared himself Lord Protector, a title that gave him more concentrated power than the king ever had. And, in a twist worthy of historical irony, he even tried to pass the role down to his son, without building any strong institutions around it.
Wow. So they slayed the dragon and handed the crown to the guy holding the sword. That's some next level meet the new boss, same as the old boss energy.
Actually, Barbara, here's the real kicker. Emphasize, the Dragon Slayer became the new dragon. What this proves is sobering. Revolutions can change leaders.
but unless they build enduring systems to constrain anyone's power, king or commoner, they're just hitting the reset button.
And let me guess, next time someone's going to hit that button again.
Oh yes, the monarchy may have been dead, but it wasn't buried for long. And the next chapter, it's called Emphasize the Restoration. Stay tuned.
Now, we are going on restoration.
So, with Cromwell finally off the scene, quite literally, he died in 1658. You can probably guess what happened next. England hit the big red reset button.
Ooh, I love a good reset button. But wait, when the new dragon disappears, what happens next? Do they just bring the king back? Or is England done with monarchs for good?
Great question. The answer is England brought back the monarchy. And here's the kicker. Many of the very same parliamentarians who fought Cromwell's war to get rid of the king were now practically tripping over themselves to invite Charles I's son, Charles II, back to the throne. This event is, quite appropriately, called the Restoration.
Seriously? The same folks who chopped off his dad's head were like, "Hey, Junior, come on back." That's wild. So was it like one big royal party then?
Absolutely. Here's a fun detail. When Charles II rode into London, some of the elite units from Cromwell's own new model army were part of his welcoming parade. While Cromwell's famous Ironsides cavalry was no more, this shows just how much support the royal comeback had, even from those who fought against the crown. It was a massive wave of public sentiment.
Wow, that's some serious political whiplash. Soldiers who fought for Parliament now cheering for the king. But what did the average person on the street think?
Most folks weren't exactly shedding tears over Cromwell's departure. Why? Because while Cromwell's rule was, to put it lightly, a bit of a party pooper.
Party pooper? Come on, Alex, spill the tea.
Cromwell was a super strict Puritan. Think of Puritans as the ultimate no-fun-allowed crowd among Protestants. They saw most worldly pleasures as sinful and demanded incredibly strict adherence to all sorts of rules. That's actually where the name Puritan comes from. They wanted to purify the church and society.
So basically, Cromwell was the guy who canceled all the fun. No parties, no theater, probably no dancing.
Exactly. Under Cromwell, England basically felt like a military camp. Theaters were shut down, entertainment was banned, and even drinking was heavily restricted. Life became pretty dull. More and more people longed for the good old days under the king.
I can just picture it, from religious zealot to rock star monarch. So Charles II was like the ultimate breath of fresh air after that?
Absolutely. Londoners lined the streets, cheering him on like he was a rock star. But restoration wasn't just history rewinding.
Wait, you mean it wasn't just a total throwback? They actually learned something?
Exactly. The king had to agree to institutional limits on his power. Charles II's authority was clipped compared to his dad, and certainly nowhere near the absolute power Cromwell had wielded.
So even going back to the monarchy, it was more like 2 steps forward, 1 step back?
Spot on. The restoration was a self-correction, still pushing the core theme of institutional checks on power.
And Charles II, he was a total contrast to old man Cromwell. Cromwell was all seriousness and self-disciplined. Charles II loved a good time, and frankly, his personal life was a bit scandalous.
Ooh, scandalous. After all that strictness, I bet people found that pretty refreshing, huh?
Absolutely. He was nicknamed the Merry Monarch for a reason. People loved his laid-back attitude. But he wasn't just about parties, right? He was into some serious stuff, too.
Indeed. He was a big fan of science. The famous Royal Society, bringing together brilliant minds like Isaac Newton, was established with his approval and a royal charter. It showed a forward-thinking side to his reign.
Wait, Newton was knighted by Charles II, right?
Actually, quick mythbuster. Newton was knighted later by Queen Anne, not Charles II. But Charles II's support of the Royal Society clearly showed his support for science and innovation.
Got it. So the Restoration wasn't just stepping backward, but a more nuanced move in British history.
Exactly. It re-established monarchy, one now fundamentally constrained by parliament and legal traditions, a step towards modern constitutional monarchy.
Fascinating. Can't wait to see where this leads next. Okay, so we've had the king, then the no king, then the king again. It sounds like England found its balance after the big party under Charles II. So everything's good now, right? Crisis averted?
Hold on a minute, Barbara. I need to tell you something. This self-correcting restoration wasn't built to last.
What? Seriously? I thought they finally figured it out. Why not? Didn't they just bring back the monarchy with strings attached?
They did, but that burning question, how to truly rein in royal power with solid, unshakable institutions, was only temporarily smoothed over, not fundamentally solved. Given enough time, and that old conflict was bound to pop right back up.
Ugh, so it was like putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. The core problem was still there, just hidden for a bit.
Exactly. Sure, Charles II was more of a go-with-the-flow kind of guy compared to his stubborn dad, Charles I. He was the merry monarch, remember? But a king is still a king, and Charles II was just as keen to expand royal power. He was simply much smarter and, dare I say, sneakier about it than his father.
Sneaky. How so? Was he like secretly signing decrees under the table?
He'd pretend to accept Parliament's limits, but then, behind the scenes, he'd find clever ways to completely bypass them on major issues. In fact, for the last 4 years of his life, Charles II didn't even bother to call Parliament into session.
Wait, what? He just ghosted Parliament for 4 years? That's a pretty bold move for a king who's supposed to be constrained.
Talk about a subtle power grab, right? So, by this point, the hard-won checks had lost their bite.
Wow. So all that fighting, all that effort to limit power just faded away? That's incredibly frustrating.
It is. It was like a historical pendulum. Just when it seemed to be settling near the center, it started swinging wildly back towards absolute power. In a situation like that, well, a second revolution suddenly not just seemed likely, it became absolutely inevitable.
So it wasn't just one big revolutionary moment, but more like a series of tremors leading to another earthquake. This sounds a lot like what we talked about earlier, with the dragon slayer becoming the new dragon idea.
It does, exactly. This whole period reminds us of that classic phrase. Once you grasp institutions as the core focus, the real pivot of this period in British history, the English Civil War and the Restoration, which often look like two opposing acts, suddenly snap into place as one unified story. They're not separate events. They're two chapters of the same gripping novel.
That's a powerful way to look at it. It really changes how you see the whole period. It's all about that ongoing struggle for power balance, not just isolated battles.
This also shows us how focusing on a key historical pivot can completely change how we look at a major event we thought we already knew. It's about seeing the threads that connect everything.
So where do we go from here? Another war? Another king getting a bad day at the office?
Not exactly, Barbara. Next time, we'll dive into how this central issue of institutional power finally got sorted out in the second act of the English Revolution, the Glorious Revolution. It's where Britain truly began to lay the foundations for what would become its unique form of constitutional monarchy.
Ooh, glorious revolution. Sounds promising. I'm ready to see how they finally cracked the code on keeping kings in line.
You won't want to miss it. And if you enjoyed today's episode,
Be sure to follow us, leave us a review, and share this with a friend who loves a good history story with a twist. See you next time on the deep codes behind Britain's rise.